Let's say you want your capital city to have about 1 million people in it, because that sounds impressive. And then your players walk through it and you somehow encounter 2 taverns and 1 blacksmith in the same 5 NPCs over and over again. So in this video, I want to talk about how do you decide how many people do you put in your city? How many buildings are there in your city? What is good? Is 100 buildings enough for 1,000 people? Is 100 buildings enough for 20,000 people? How many buildings does it take for your city to run appropriately? Let's talk about that. So what we're going to do is, instead of starting with the population, we're going to work backwards the same way that real cities did, in that the population increased and buildings increased from there to support that population. So the first thing that you should decide is how many buildings exist. How many buildings do you want to see in your skyline, and what kinds of buildings are they? So for example, in pre-industrial cities, I'm talking medieval ages and back before that, right? The vast majority of people lived where they worked. That means that homes weren't neatly separated from the shops. A blacksmith didn't live across the town. Their family lived above or behind the forge in a smaller building. The same was true for bakers, cobblers, weavers, tailors, and butchers. Pretty much any skilled trade. And historically, one skilled trade could support roughly 100 to 150 people, maybe 200 people if you were quick. Again, this is just ballpark estimates, but that means that in a town of about 1,000 people, you would expect 6 to 10 blacksmiths or metalworkers, 10 to 15 bakers, several butchers or fishmongers, dozens of textile workers to keep up with the demand of repairing clothing and tailoring and that sort of thing. You would have at least 10 to 15 taverns, because what you have to think is that there's no TV, there's no internet, there's no phone or newspapers. You didn't have Craigslist or Etsy or eBay or Amazon to go purchase your things. So a tavern and lots of these places really were like the center points of the cities. And taverns especially is where you got your news. It's where you would catch up with friends. You would look for work. You would trade with people. It was a place for outsiders to come and visit and stay and drink with the locals. And in a small village, it could also be a general store. It could be the place where the stables are. It could be the post office. So you can really up the amount of taverns, because aside from a church, or in this case in a fantasy world, temple or a shrine or something like that, this is the biggest part of community life in a pre-industrialized city. Now, obviously, if you're in a fantasy setting where the cities are extremely advanced, you can start to kind of veer away from this and start to think in terms of more modern day settings. But if we're looking at like pre-industrialized medieval setting, this is the sort of go-to, is like reference what we have seen, reference the things that we know. So I'm diving into the past. Now, in medieval Europe, a rough estimate was that there was about 1 tavern or an ale house per 1 to 200 people, depending on the culture and depending on how much people drank in your town, that sort of thing, right? Weather would be a huge part of it. So a town of 1,000 people might have 5 to 10 drinking establishments, maybe 15 or 20 if they were big drinkers. That's where my numbers are coming from. So a city of 10,000 people means that you could have easily 50 or more taverns. Many of them would be tiny, dirty, and like indistinguishable except to locals, but they would be there. They would be places where people would congregate. And hearing that, you might start to think that like, wow, like I really didn't realize how many taverns my city should have, especially if you have like a metropolis where you have people living in a city of, 50,000, 100,000, maybe 1 million or more. You would have hundreds of taverns. So you might be thinking to yourself, I don't have enough taverns. Now, when you start placing buildings like that, population isn't so abstract anymore, because then you can start to kind of see how many people are going to be in these buildings, how many homes, how many workshops, warehouses, that sort of thing. So kind of lay that out in your head as far as like what the city skyline looks like. That's what helps me. Again, if this isn't how you do it, maybe this will help jog your creative juices a little bit. But why did I say it like that? So then the next thing that you want to do is just start to decide how many people live in each building, because this is where fantasy cities are usually a little generous, at least in my experience. So a small single-story home might have 4 to 6 people, right? You're looking at parents, children, maybe a grandparent. That's already really crowded by modern standards. That's 3 generations in a single household. Now you add on top of that, if you're living in like a blacksmith shop, for example, you would have apprentices sleeping in the workshop. You would have servants living with employers, extended families that are sharing space. And in poorer districts, that density would skyrocket. Historically, tenement-style housing could pack 10 to 20 people in a single structure, sometimes more, multiple families, shared beds, absolutely zero privacy. This is how medieval cities like Paris or even early London reached tens of thousands of residents without actually growing. I mean, you can see a map of medieval London here, and you'd be surprised to know that the population of medieval London, I'm talking about like the 14 to 1500s, was approximately 50,000. Some sources would say even more. Now, you also want to think about nobility and class status, because a noble estate would often house a lot fewer people than, say, a slum block. A mansion would look enormous, but it would probably only contain one family and a handful of servants and their guards. So maybe 20 to 30 people, whereas a single crowded street of laborers could completely exceed that. You would have hundreds of people in one single street. And that leads us to the next thing that you want to account for, or the third thing, I guess, in this list, which is life expectancy. And that's something that I want you to think about. There is no right answer to this, right? If medicine is prevalent in your world, if magic is common, life expectancy is probably much, much higher. So in most pre-modern societies, average life expectancy hovered between 30 and 40 years of age. And that number was really dragged down heavily by infant mortality. And that's just a really sad truth. I know that's really dark. I'm sorry. That doesn't mean that everyone dropped dead at 35. It just means that cities were constantly losing people and constantly replacing them for a lot of reasons. There was constant disease being spread because of the lack of sanitary conditions. And then when you add in war and accidents, a city's population is never really stable, at least not historically. And in many historical cities, about 5 to 10% of the population might be absent at any given time due to military service or seasonal labor, like going out fishing or, that sort of thing. Trading, some people would be on a pilgrimage. There would be displacement from conflicts. So if your city is frequently being attacked by, insert orcs or goblins or dragons, whatever, if it's constantly under siege or it's being plagued by monsters, that number is going to go up. Population loss is going to become visible. So there's going to be abandoned homes. There's going to be empty shops. You're going to have orphaned children, refugees moving in to replace the dead people. So when you look at the city skyline, you really want to take into account just how many people live there, but also how many people should live there versus how many are actually living there. Because that's part of the storytelling. Is the city bustling and busy because it's prosperous and it's relatively safe, or is it a ghost town because it's constantly under attack? So when you know how many buildings you want in your skyline approximately, if just imagine you're in a bird's eye view looking down at the city, right? Use the map of London as reference. Use any map of a medieval city as reference. When you're looking down at the city, is it crowded? Is there thousands of buildings? If it's 1,000 buildings, 2,000 buildings, then you can start to kind of multiply. Well, how many people would there be in these buildings? 1,000 buildings times 5, you would have maybe 1,000 people. Or if you have 1,000 buildings and there's 5 to 6 people per building, and then you can start to kind of think, well, there's also the warehouses. So you can start to kind of subtract some of the buildings. Approximately 200 of them don't have people in them because they're storage. And then there's the barracks and, this sort of thing. You start to kind of see in your own brain which buildings have more people, which ones have less. And you can start to kind of see the population numbers come to your mind so that you can start to make sort of estimated guesses. Then you take into account life expectancy and you can sort of see the heartbeat of the city, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. So now that we have all of that in account, you can start to kind of get a general idea for what you believe the population might be for your town. But now let's talk about vertical growth, because small towns will spread outward. Large cities will grow upward. So once land becomes valuable and buildings start to stack, I'm talking like 2 stories, 3 stories, then you get into a different sort of realm because you'll have shops on the ground floor and then living spaces above. We see this today in New York, in really any major city that has skyscrapers. Usually there's storage below in the basements, there's the shop in the center, the living spaces above. In medieval cities like Florence, 3 and 4 story buildings were super common even without modern engineering. And that matters because the more height you get, then the more population you can get, and you're not expanding outside the city walls, which was super important because the walls kept people safe. So if your city mostly has single-story buildings, it physically cannot support larger numbers after a certain point. So a city of 20,000 people might require 4,000 to 5,000 residential buildings, right? Because 4 to 5,000 times 5 is, 4 times 5 is around 20,000 to 25,000, right? If they're low density. But if those same buildings are 3 stories tall and densely packed, then you can house the same population in a fraction of that footprint. So if your city feels big but looks flat, then something's off. And finally, here's the step that I think makes all of this usable. Decide your desired population last. That's what I would do. And then you can adjust the city to match. So ask yourself what you want the city to feel like. Is it a small town of 500 to 1,000 people? Because it's an intimate space. Everybody knows everybody. There's 1 or 2 taverns. There's a handful of trades. Gossip spreads. You know, is it that? Or is it a city of 5,000 to 10,000 that's busy? It's got multiple districts. There's dozens of taverns. There's specialized trades. There's a city watch. There's maybe slums starting to form. Or is it a metropolis? Is it a massive city of 25,000, 50,000, 100,000 people that feels overwhelming with dense housing, and there's vertical growth, and there's whole neighborhoods that your players never see because there's crime, there's bureaucracy, there's shortages of food, there's constant movement. Anything beyond that starts behaving less like a city and more like this sort of ebbing and flowing like organism, I guess. Once you know what you want your city to feel like, you can adjust the population from there and then work backwards and start to adjust the number of buildings, the number of taverns, the height of the city skyline, all of that stuff. So if your city feels too empty, increase the density. If it feels too small, then add verticality and add trades. If it feels unreal, then check whether the number of buildings that you have in your head actually supports the number that you picked. Anyways, that's what I would do. What do you guys do when you're building your cities, when you're deciding how many people to put in it, what the population is, how many buildings to put into it? Let me know in the comments down below. Am I just a weirdo and I think way too much about this? Really quick, I just want to interject here. If you want to help support the channel, there's a massive number of you that aren't subscribed. One of the biggest things that you could do to help this channel, to help me make this more of like my full-time thing, is just subscribe. Give it a like, give it a subscribe. It's right there. Just do it really quick if you haven't already. And if you have the means, if you want to help a little bit more, I'm actually making it my goal for this new year in 2026 when I'm releasing this to be posting on Patreon more. So if you have the means, if you want to help support, if even 1% of my subscribers signed up to my Patreon right now, here's a QR code, here's the link. If even 1% signed up right now, I could do this full time and it would just be life-changing. And again, only if you have the means. If you want to help support the channel, I will be posting things on my Patreon that don't make it to the YouTube for lots of various reasons, including Let's Plays and that sort of thing, maybe going live. So if that's your sort of thing, you want to hang out with me, you want to see more of my content, you can head over to the Patreon. And if you don't have the means, please don't give me your money. It's really not that important. I will continue to make the content regardless. Anyways, back to the video. Tabletop Tiger, awesome name, says, DJ D Kitty is a regular tavern performer. Some say the music transports them to another place. Whether you mean that in our musical hearts or whether you mean that it's literally taking you to another realm, you're correct both ways. KevRobe1, great catch. Justice_YT says, I left my phone down away from me and I was starting to wonder where I put it just listening to the video with my headphones. I came back to our displacer friend. He was waiting for you. He was waiting for you the whole time. He's always there for you. If you were paying attention in today's video, leave a timestamp in the comments down below with where you saw Tobias in this video. Leave me a question and you just might get shouted out in the next one. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. As always, forge on, my friends, and remember, walk quietly, there's neighbors downstairs.